Everyone feared Damien Blackwood, the ruthless billionaire who crushed anyone in his way. But no one expected the quiet waitress he mocked to turn the tables, exposing his lies, humiliating him, and serving justice in front of the entire city. The rain pounded against the apartment window, a relentless rhythm that matched the ache in Maya Carter's chest. She stared at the framed photo of her father on the dresser, Ethan Carter, always smiling, always honest. Officially, his death had been called a suicide. But Maya knew the truth. She had been there the night Damien Blackwood fired him. The night the ruthless billionaire CEO destroyed everything her father had built. She had watched the grief in her mother's eyes, the slow erosion of a family torn apart not by fate but by greed. Maya's fists clenched at the memory. Her father had been upright, loyal, relentless in his principles, yet powerless against Damien's empire. The company he had nurtured, the lives he had protected, all sacrificed for Damien's ambition. The injustice had burned itself into Maya's heart. She had cried, screamed, and begged for justice in her quiet, private moments. But grief alone was not enough. Tears did not bring him back. They did not punish Damien. Over the years, Maya's sorrow had transformed into focus, patience, and meticulous planning. She had studied every move Damien made, every public appearance, every private dinner she could glimpse through society pages and staff whispers. She had learned the rhythms of his life, the arrogance that made him careless, and the fear he inspired in others. She did not need brute force. She needed strategy. Her mother's warning echoed in her mind. Maya, don't lose yourself in this. Revenge isn't worth it if it consumes you. Maya had smiled faintly then, but now she understood. This was not about vengeance. This was about justice. Her father's name had been tarnished, his life reduced to rumors and false accusations. The world needed to know the truth, and she would make them listen. Maya's gaze fell on a small notebook filled with careful notes, schedules, locations, employees' whispers, security patterns. Every detail mattered. Every hour spent observing the hotel, Damien's favorite haunts, his entourage, brought her closer to the moment she had envisioned countless times. The moment Damien Blackwood would finally be confronted with his own corruption. Tonight, she whispered under her breath, she would start the first step, not with fireworks, not with confrontation, but quietly, patiently, in a way no one would suspect. A waitress could move unnoticed. A waitress could serve and observe. A waitress could plant the seeds of truth. And Maya Carter had patience. She had a plan, and she had a fire that could not be extinguished. The storm outside matched the storm inside her. One day, she promised, Damien Blackwood would pay. But it would be on her terms, carefully, deliberately, and undeniably. Maya adjusted her crisp white uniform in the small locker room of the Grand Meridian Hotel. The name tag read, Maya, just enough to blend in without drawing attention. She took a deep breath, listening to the soft hum of the hotel, the distant clink of glasses, muffled conversation, the elevator dinging as guests arrived and departed. To anyone else, this was just another bustling night at one of the city's most prestigious hotels. To Maya, it was the first real step toward the man who had ruined her father's life. She carried a tray of drinks down the polished marble hallway, moving with calm precision. Guests barely noticed her as intended. Maya observed everything. Security guards chatting too casually, cameras fixed in blind spots, waiters slipping unnoticed behind grand curtains. Every shift was a reconnaissance mission, every tray a chance to study the patterns she had memorized over months. Her first encounter with Damien Blackwood came sooner than she expected. He was seated at a private table in the hotel's glass-walled lounge, surrounded by investors and assistants, his presence commanding the room. His voice carried easily, full of arrogance as he laughed at a joke only he found clever. Maya felt her pulse quicken. This was him, the man who had destroyed her father, unaware that someone was watching, learning, and waiting. She moved closer to refill a glass, her hand steady. Damien's eyes swept the room like a hawk, and for a brief second they landed on her. He sneered, barely disguising his disdain. "You're too slow," he muttered under his breath, not looking directly at her. Maya nodded politely, keeping her head down. She had expected this, and she had trained herself not to react. Every ounce of emotion she felt needed to be concealed. Behind the scenes, Maya began connecting the dots. Former employees whispered rumors in her ear during late shifts. A disgruntled accountant quietly slipped her an envelope containing partial financial records. A janitor who had seen too much provided security schedules. Every fragment, every quiet tip, built the map she needed. The hotel became her laboratory, and she was the scientist observing, cataloging, and preparing for the precise moment when everything would come together. By the end of the week, she had memorized Damien's favorite drinks, his preferred table in the lounge, and even the way he bristled at minor mistakes from his staff. The arrogance, she realized, was both his shield and his weakness. He believed no one could challenge him, and that belief would be his undoing. Maya walked past him one evening refilling a glass and felt a thrill of anticipation. Every tray she carried, every order she took was part of the plan. The waitress he ignored, the shadow he never saw. That shadow was sharpening, preparing to strike. And when the time came, Damien Blackwood would finally meet someone he could not intimidate, dismiss, or control. Maya sat in the quiet corner of the hotel's employee lounge, a stack of files spread across the small table. Each document was another thread in the web she had been weaving for months. Financial statements, internal emails, even deleted message backups she had painstakingly recovered, all pieces pointing to Damien Blackwood's ruthless tactics. Every file told the same story. Her father had been honest, loyal, and wrongfully destroyed by a man who would stop at nothing to protect his empire. She tapped her pen against the papers, thinking through the next steps. Patience was key. One false move, one hint of her identity, and Damien could silence her, bury the truth, and undo all her careful work. But she had allies now, a few trusted hotel staff who had seen Damien's manipulations firsthand. Employees who knew the truth, but feared reprisal. Maya coordinated quietly, meeting them after shifts, exchanging tips in hushed tones, careful to leave no trace. Recording devices were her next tool. She had hidden tiny, almost invisible microphones in the hotel's private rooms, where Damien often conducted off-the-record conversations with investors. Over weeks, she captured him boasting about cover-ups, bribing officials, and manipulating layoffs. Each recording was a nail in the coffin, each snippet another exposure of his arrogance and cruelty. Maya's mind flashed to her father, imagining his meticulous habits, his dedication, his unwavering principles. She smiled faintly, a private, bittersweet victory. Her father had taught her to observe, to reason, to prepare before acting. She was honoring his memory with every careful step. She also had physical proof, contracts that had been altered, emails that had been deleted but archived in backups, and notes from former employees confirming Damien's lies. Slowly, methodically, she assembled a dossier that would be impossible to ignore. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about exposing the truth, clearing her father's name, and bringing a man who thrived on intimidation into the light. Even as she moved trays and refilled glasses during her shifts, her mind worked tirelessly. She memorized Damien's speech patterns, how he reacted to certain questions, his favorite excuses. The more she observed, the more she understood his weaknesses, and the more precise her plan became. She wasn't just collecting evidence. She was constructing the stage for the moment he would finally be confronted. By the end of the month, Maya had everything she needed. A dossier filled with records, audio recordings, and witness statements. A network of quiet allies ready to corroborate every claim. And most importantly, a strategy to strike when Damien was most vulnerable. Surrounded by his investors, smug in his perceived untouchability, unaware that the woman he dismissed as insignificant was preparing to bring him down. Maya closed the notebook, letting the weight of the plan settle. The night of reckoning would come soon. Every detail had been considered, every step calculated, and when the time arrived, Damien Blackwood would face the consequences of the empire he had built on lies. The 70th floor of Blackwood Tower gleamed under the city lights, the skyline stretching endlessly beyond the glass walls. Crystal glasses sparkled under the chandeliers, silverware arranged with flawless precision. A long mahogany table stretched down the center of the private dining room, where Damien Blackwood lounged at the head, flanked by investors whose wealth and influence were palpable. The atmosphere was polished, confident, and deceptively calm, exactly the kind of environment Damien thrived in. Maya slipped in quietly, a tray balanced in her hands, dressed in the hotel uniform that had become her second skin. Her movements were precise, her posture unassuming, blending seamlessly into the background. No one noticed her except for a fleeting glance from Damien, his arrogance momentarily flickering across his face as he caught her shadow in the corner of his eye. He dismissed it instantly, returning to his conversation with the investors. "Blackwood, the acquisition projections are impressive," one investor said, tapping on his tablet. "But your numbers for Q4 seem aggressive. Are you confident?" Damien laughed, leaning back in his chair, exuding the kind of smug certainty that had destroyed many of his competitors' confidence. "Confidence?" he said, voice smooth and controlled. "I don't need confidence. I have strategy. My team executes flawlessly, and failures. Well, we learn quickly. But in my world, failure is a word reserved for others." His laughter filled the room, a sharp, calculated sound that echoed against the glass walls. Maya moved among the staff, topping up water glasses and offering wine to the guests, all while memorizing the layout of the table, the positions of the investors, and Damien's gestures. Every detail mattered. She noted the positions of security guards, the gaps in camera coverage, and the precise moment Damien would raise his voice or gesture in a way that revealed arrogance. She paused near a sideboard, gently setting down a bottle of red wine while her eyes tracked Damien's every move. His voice rose, telling a story of dominance, manipulation, and untouchable power. Investors nodded, impressed or afraid. She wasn't yet sure which. Each word he spoke, each boast he made was fuel for her plan. Maya's pulse was steady. This was the stage she had been preparing for. Not in secrecy, not in shadows, but in plain sight. The dinner continued, laughter and polite conversation flowing, unaware that the woman they barely noticed was already orchestrating the moment that would shatter Damien Blackwood's carefully maintained illusion of invincibility. For the first time in months, Maya allowed herself a faint, controlled smile. The night was just beginning, and the pieces were finally in place. Maya approached the table carrying a tray of wine and dessert, her movements calm and unhurried, every step rehearsed 100 times in her mind. Damien glanced at her briefly, his sharp eyes scanning for mistakes. When a few drops of wine splashed onto the tablecloth, his sneer widened. "Careful," he barked, voice cutting through the polite murmur of investors. "Are you blind or just incompetent?" Maya bowed slightly, hiding the thrill of anticipation in her chest. "I apologize, sir," she said softly, her voice steady. She placed the tray down and adjusted a glass. Every gesture was designed to appear routine, harmless, yet calculated. As Damien turned to recount another story of his business conquests, Maya moved closer, planting the small, hidden recording device she had prepared in advance. The device was nearly invisible, a tiny pinhole microphone that would capture every word he spoke once activated. Her fingers trembled just slightly, not with fear but with the weight of what was about to unfold. Damien laughed at his own joke, slapping the table with exaggerated self-assurance. Investors chuckled politely, some leaning in to catch every word. Maya's hand hovered over the wine glass. With a decisive motion, she flung the red liquid across his face, the wine splattering onto his crisp white shirt and dripping onto the polished table. Gasps echoed around the room, the sound of shocked disbelief ricocheting off the walls. Damien sputtered, hands waving, trying to wipe the wine from his eyes. What the hell?" he shouted, panic flaring in his tone. "Security." Maya stepped forward, her calm contrasting sharply with his flailing. She pressed the activation button on the device, and Damien's voice, recorded over weeks of careful preparation, boomed through the room. "If the press finds out about the layoffs, make it look like safety violations. I don't care how many people we fire. Just protect my shares." The investors froze, faces pale, eyes wide. Damien's confident posture crumbled. "Turn it off. Turn it off now," he demanded, voice shaking. Maya did not move. She looked directly into his eyes, steady and unwavering. "This is the man who destroyed my father," she said clearly, her voice carrying through the room. "The man who thought my family could be erased. Every lie, every threat, every crime, all exposed." Maya stepped closer, her voice calm but firm. "No, Damien. You were crystal clear. These are your words, your instructions. My father did nothing wrong, and I have proof. Everything you tried to hide, everything you thought could be erased, is now here, in front of everyone." The recording device continued to broadcast snippets of Damien's private conversations, emails, and directives. Staff who had once feared him now whispered confirmations. Former employees carefully placed in the room or on calls corroborated every claim. The veil of invincibility Damien had worn for years was lifting, and the facade crumbled. Investors began shifting in their seats, glances exchanged, alliances reconsidered. The power that Damien had wielded through intimidation and secrecy evaporated in the light of truth. Phones clicked. Reporters outside the building caught wind, and soon the story would flood every news outlet. Damien realized with growing horror that his empire of fear was unraveling, and it had started with the waitress he had dismissed without a second thought. Maya's chest swelled with quiet triumph. Years of careful observation, patience, and meticulous preparation had led to this moment. This was not about vengeance. This was about justice. Her father's name, once tainted and silenced, was now being restored before the eyes of the city's most powerful. Damien's shouting grew louder, desperate. "Stop her. Remove her. This is unacceptable." But no one moved. His authority had vanished, replaced by the undeniable proof of his corruption. Maya stayed composed, letting the room absorb the revelation. Every gasp, every murmur, every recording amplified her victory. Damien Blackwood was exposed, humiliated, and powerless. A man whose arrogance had blinded him to the quiet strength of a woman he had underestimated. Chaos erupted across the 70th floor. Investors murmured urgently among themselves, some standing abruptly, phones pressed to ears. Damien's once commanding presence had evaporated. He flailed, his drenched suit a visual testament to his downfall, shouting orders that no one dared follow. Security guards glanced at each other, hesitant. The fear that had once made them obedient had been replaced with uncertainty. Maya stepped back slightly, letting the scene unfold. Cameras hidden in the room, along with phones now streaming live, captured every detail. Damien tried to reclaim control, pounding his fist on the mahogany table. "You don't understand. This is a mistake," he yelled, voice cracking under pressure. But the investors were no longer listening to him. Whispers turned to quiet discussions, then to firm nods and decisive movements. Deals once promised to Damien's empire were now reconsidered. Advisors and board members exchanged urgent glances. The network of fear he had cultivated for decades was collapsing in minutes. Reporters had flooded the lobby, alerted by hotel staff who had witnessed the confrontation. News cameras rolled, broadcasting the story live. A billionaire humiliated, drenched in wine, exposed for corruption and deceit. The city watched, captivated by the dramatic unraveling of the untouchable Blackwood empire. Damien's face twisted with rage and panic as staff and investors began filing complaints, rescinding commitments and demanding explanations. His empire, built on intimidation, secrecy, and arrogance, was cracking before the eyes of everyone who had ever feared him. Maya's voice remained steady as she addressed the room one last time. "This is not just about exposing a corrupt man. It's about restoring truth. My father's life, destroyed by lies, now has its voice back. And the person who believed he was untouchable, he has been shown the consequence of arrogance unchecked." The room fell silent, the weight of her words sinking in. Damien's attempts at denial grew weaker, more desperate, until they faded into frustrated muttering. Investors quietly left, reporters recorded every step, and staff exchanged looks of relief and admiration. Maya turned toward the elevator, moving with calm precision. Outside, the city lights glimmered through the glass, the noise of the reporters and flashing cameras following her every step. The empire Damien had built on fear had crumbled, and she had orchestrated every piece of its collapse with patience, intelligence, and resolve. For the first time in years, Maya felt the weight lift from her chest. The grief that had driven her, the years of meticulous preparation, and the quiet observation had all led to this. Damien Blackwood, the man who had once seemed untouchable, was now powerless, and her father's name finally was cleared. Maya stepped out of the elevator onto the street, the cold night air brushing against her face. Sirens echoed faintly from the hotel lobby below, mingling with the shouts of reporters and the camera flashes that lit up the city sidewalk. She walked steadily, unhurried, letting the moment settle around her. The world had witnessed Damien Blackwood's downfall, and her father's name had been restored. She paused for a moment under the glow of a street lamp, thinking of Ethan Carter, his calm integrity, his unwavering honesty, The quiet strength he had instilled in her, all those years of grief, of quiet planning, had led to this moment. And now, justice had been served not through violence, but through patience, intelligence, and truth. A news crew called her name, asking for a statement. Maya shook her head, smiling faintly, almost shyly. "No," she said softly. "The truth has spoken for itself." She kept walking, blending into the night, leaving behind the chaos, the cameras, and the shattered empire of a man who had thought himself untouchable. From a distance, the city skyline sparkled, oblivious to the personal victory that had just occurred high above in Blackwood Tower. Investors were reeling, the press buzzing, and Damian Blackwood's reputation lay in ruins. Yet Maya felt no triumph in arrogance, only a quiet, steady satisfaction. Her father's legacy had been honored, her patience and courage validated, and the world had seen that even the smallest, quietest person could dismantle the strongest tyrant. She paused at the corner, inhaling deeply, letting the night embrace her. The wind carried the distant echo of sirens and camera shutters, but she felt a serenity she hadn't known in years. She had turned grief into action, weakness into strength, and silence into proof. And most importantly, she had done it on her terms. Maya looked up at the stars, letting a small, private smile form. Ethan Carter's voice, integrity, and legacy would now echo through the world, louder than Damian Blackwood's arrogance ever could. With every step away from the tower, the weight of years lifted. The city continued its rhythm, unaware of the quiet victory that had just reshaped the balance of power. For Maya, the night was not about revenge, it was about justice, patience, and the restoration of what was rightfully hers to honor. And as she disappeared into the quiet streets, the world knew. Even a single determined person could topple an empire built on lies. The lights of Blackwood Tower dimmed behind her, but the truth, and the legacy she had fought to restore, burned brighter than ever. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this cinematic story of courage, patience, and justice, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful tales that will keep you on the edge of your seat.